discussing about the whole notion of public space, public art, and public. And I think the first session ended with a very stimulating discussion about the idea of public, and which also feeds into this panel where we are looking at role of curators, artists, and different kinds of publics in shaping different public art practices. And for that panel, we have four speakers. Our first speaker is Pooja Sood. Pooja Sood is as you all know, independent curator and art management consultant. As a curator, she has worked extensively with alternative contemporary art practices and is perhaps one of the first people to provide a platform for artists to engage in public art in New Delhi, both through Khoj, where she is the director, and as part of her various curatorial projects. So she's going to talk about one of her curatorial projects, 48 degrees Celsius public art ecology today. So Pooja.
Thank you, everybody. And I'm very excited to be talking about 48 degrees right here at the Goethe Insitut, where it started, where the conversation began with the Max Mueller Bhavan and Stefan Dreyer, who actually invited me to said that would you be interested in doing something about the city? It was as vague as that. And I think, to correct Nupur, I was not one of the first few to create a space for public art. That's been happening well before, but to build on that really is we had at Khoj been having a few small residencies and looking at site-specific work, but also looking at public projects. One of them in 2007 being, in fact, Ravi and Atul's work, which was on Jamuna. We gave us residency which was around ecology and was on the Jamuna River. And it was really fascinating for us to have done that little project, because it was also the beginning, I must say. This is almost 8 years ago now. Yeah, it's 8 years, 2007, 8, 9 years, well, a decade. And I have to say that at that point, not every artist was looking at ecology. And so one of the things one of the reasons out of many, when Stefan asked me to do this, I was very excited. Didn't know what I was getting into, of course, and I was very excited and said, okay, yeah, sure, we'll do public art. Let's see what it's all about. And having said yes, actually I was totally thrown. I think one of the biggest questions for me when I started, I was driving around thinking about it. Just to retract, it was going to be a collaboration with the GTZ, which was economic, environmental organization, not-for-profit German organization. And so they wanted us to really talk about something to do with ecology. So those were the two things, that something to do with city and something to do with ecology. Let's look at city spaces. I think for me, the biggest question was one of access, both geographical and, of course, conceptual. That how are we going to even make sense of public space, the city of Delhi, which is completely crazy, chaotic, spectacle in itself? And how does one even begin to navigate and find those public spaces at all? So I think I kind of inverted it and said, let's look for access. Let's look at how we will get around first. And I was very lucky at that point. I think we were just looking at what could be a festival route, because it was really an experiment. It was an experiment for me as a curator saying, what if anything happens if you put public contemporary art out there in the public space? Does it make any difference to anybody? What's the point? Secondly, of course, that if we did, can we also break the notions of what contemporary or modern art, as most people know it as, which is something my kid can do because it's just scribbles. And I'm just talking about the general perceptions people have of art. Anyway, to go back, I think I was trying to say, okay, if it was a festival, because that's the way we coined it, as it was just an experiment, how could we even begin to navigate the city? And I was very lucky. I was thinking of the metro, because it had just come up. This was 2 years before Commonwealth Games was to start. The city was totally torn apart, and the big new thing that was coming up was the metro. We had only the yellow line then. And of course, the big discussion about the metro at that point was that, yeah, great, it's great for development. It's cutting across the city. It's going to take people with great ease. But also, what's it doing to all the trees? I know that several artists, including Ravi and organizations, were up in arms because all of Barakhamba was actually denuded by the trees. And so I said, okay, what if we just went around the metro and let's see if we can use that? And actually, Ravi and I mentioned it to him, and we spent a whole day getting on and off the metro and seeing what are these spaces all about. Because how do you even make sense of a city, and how do you get around it? So do you just start saying, okay, this is a public space and let's insert art there, or how do we? So it was really a reversal. I'm just going to show you a few images because to talk, or rather a film, which was a documentation. And I just want to, because some of the questions that I was asked by Nupur was to say that, what is the curator's role in it vis-a-vis what did people think about it? Is this, can we have the sound, please? This is...
वैसे यहाँ पहले हुआ नहीं है ये सब जो हो रहा है
क्या अजीब से यार लोग देख रहे हैं पता नहीं क्या चीज़ आ गई यहाँ पे चारों तरफ.
It was a very short 10-day festival.
I think this is one major milestone in that direction. That's why, particularly as Lieutenant Governor of Delhi, I wish to warmly appreciate, on behalf of 17 million citizens of Delhi, the opportunity provided by yourselves to put up a festival like this with the support of leading artists from around the public artists from around the world. I do hope this will be a great success.
An experiment set within the capital, 48 degrees Celsius Public Art Ecology, was the first large-scale public art festival in India. The festival introduced contemporary art into public spaces familiar to diverse people. It attempted to draw the public's attention, thereby enticing them into critically analyzing the state of their city. The name 48 degrees Celsius was a reference to Delhi's continued...
The reason I kept, and I want to discuss the role of the government, of course, but first I'll just go back and say how we put this together, because it's really important. It was the first time I was doing such a big project. And I think apart from access, the second thing was really collaboration, because there was no way that I could do something like this and try and understand, even unpack what the city of Delhi meant without partners. So we got in touch with Arnav Dasgupta, who's now with the SPA. He teaches design, urban design, and he brought a whole group of students together. And he said, okay, when I was telling him this, and I said, can we just map the spaces around the city? How can we even begin to, what are the important spaces? What does it look like? He actually got a whole bunch of students to do a full research, and it was a big fat publication which was mapping it not only geographically but socially. What were the people who went through, what did it mean to ecologically, and also in some ways the psychology, what was that historic value of that space, and what did people expect from spaces like that. And by the time we were done with the yellow line, which I'll show you the map of, we'd been through Old Delhi, Lutyens' Delhi, and came to New Delhi. So in a sense it went through the fabric, historical fabric and social fabric of Delhi, so to speak.
Continuously escalating temperatures in the wake of global warming, as well as Delhi's feverish building activity and its steadily crumbling ecology. The festival was spread around 8 locations in both Old and New Delhi. All locations were within a 5-minute walk or a 10-minute rickshaw ride from the respective metro rail stations.
If you look at the spaces, it's a journey through Delhi. It's a journey through the history of Delhi and the contemporary of Delhi today. And I think because the spaces we choose then finally were so significant, the whole project worked.
With the help of the Urban Resource Group, several months were spent after much consideration about their historical, political and sociological context. These selected spaces to choose from.
once we got a whole understanding and mapping of this space, it seemed like, okay, so we've got this, but where are the artists? Who are we going to really invite for this? We had exactly 18 months or 16 months really, and there was no way I could do, primary research. One knew of various projects that had started happening around with artists working with art and ecology. So for international artists, a lot of it was secondary research. And for Indian artists, which was really more the concern, because we really wanted it to open it up, it was just inviting artists who you knew wanted to work in public spaces, some who had, and very few at that time, had been able to develop strategies of working in public spaces where you're actually working with a different kind of public. It's not within the constituents of the white cube, and especially since it was all outdoors, but also in public spaces such as we had the Delhi Public Library. We had spaces which have just kind of closed up, and you don't even imagine that they are. And of course, once one began to work or begin to look at it, one of the biggest stumbling blocks. To talk about the artists first was to try and list a whole lot of artists, Indian artists, and invite them to participate in that. Each artist was taken on a 2-day tour of Delhi in this manner with Urban Art Resource. They were invited to choose a location that they wanted to think about, and then come up with a project proposal, which we gave them 3 to 6 months. We did that exactly the same thing for the international artists, for most of the international artists, except for 1 or 2 who we just wanted to bring some work, which we already knew about, or ask them to present a project. And I think that itself took a lot of time, but that was really exciting, because I think for several artists it was also a rediscovery of Delhi itself. And so in terms of audiences, it was equally the artists who were audience as the public, whatever that is. I think it was also forcing and inviting artists to think of ways of working and different strategies of engaging with these places where you really don't know who is going to be the public. And how's it going to work? One of the biggest problems really for me was permissions, because very soon into the project one realized there was no public space. Either it was private, gated communities, or it belonged to the government. And the government is not an easy animal to talk to, because although we had the blessings of the Delhi government, and we had this very big conversation with the Lieutenant Governor, who invited all the people, the Delhi DDA, etc., for a meeting where we had to make a presentation. And when we made that presentation, actually, I had no projects to present. I mean, we hadn't even done the first round of projects. What were we going to tell them what's going to happen there? And so we had to kind of, rough sketches that maybe an artist had given, some other kinds of projects that have happened internationally was what we had to use. And we said, okay, this is what's going to happen. And I think the Lieutenant Governor said, yes, of course, everybody please help. Despite that, the biggest problem, I think 80% of my time, because thankfully I didn't have to fundraise, was pushing files. Was just asking every person, because when you ask the police, you can have a police person, you can have the traffic police, but when you get to the other police, they'll say, no, this doesn't work for us for X, Y, Z. When you go to the NDMC, they'll say, yeah, of course it's fine, but that's a park, so you have to go to the horticulture department. So by the time we had really fixed things, not to mention the fact that in November, and we were opening in December, we had the blasts at the Taj in Bombay, and we thought the project was going to close up. But I have to say, we waited for a week. What the government did do is take away some prime site, which was Rajiv Chowk, and gave us something else. And artists had worked site specifically. They knew this is what they wanted to do and for what reason, why they had chosen. For example, Atul's work was very close, was at Kashmiri Gate, and it had to be close to the Yamuna, so that was fine. But I think Vivan's entire project, which looked at the big canal in Rajiv Chowk, in that big garden, had to be shifted to Roshanara Garden. I mean, we just couldn't help it. Either we didn't do those projects, or we had to somehow create a case for them. So those are last-minute exigencies that you have to work with. But I think working with the government was a huge learning, very huge, because sometimes the person who was moving the file would say, but what is going to happen here? And really, for visual arts, what is going to happen? It's not a Bollywood story. It's not it's not a dance program which has a beginning and an end. You don't know whether there are going to be 200 people or 1,000 people. So security was a big issue, that I don't know how many people we're going to allocate to this place. And anyway, the government said very categorically, you have better get your own security to put this thing, because we don't have that kind of police to put out for sites all over the place. And there were different police stations and different zones, etc. So it was a difficult thing working with the government, but it also made you realize that actually nothing is public. I mean, what is this public space, this amorphous thing that you're talking about in Delhi? It doesn't exist. So one of the things that we did do is look at this, this was also the time, just looking at the spaces that were there, if we could animate some of the places, like the one that Ravi worked in, which was the Museum of Natural History, which I think nobody goes into at Mandi House. But actually trying to get people to go into that was important. One sec,
To Delhi's contemporary artists who commented upon the escalating problem of diminution.
Were so significant.
The artists were then offered the selected spaces to choose from, and they made their final selection in accordance with their artistic expression.
Bhavan's change site.
It's a recurring theme, yes. Water is one recurring theme, and we work in all sorts of different media. We use photography, videos.
The artists who commented upon the escalating problem of diminishing fresh water.
This was Atul's work.
It's visually just so impressive. So even if you don't know right away what it's about, it really strikes your eyes. And the sound of the water and the elephant on the screen and the books around it, it's beautiful.
This was Shiva's work, which I think you've all seen in
Chati's
different
water diviner
manifestations.
in the Delhi Public Library in Chandni Chowk, however, was a different perspective of water, unearthing its historical and cultural connotations. Her work was about the lost memory of water and the disconnect in the relationships with it today.
Which is Shahjahanabad in the 1850s. This section that I use shows exactly the area where this installation is. So it's extraordinary to think that this road, the busy road opposite the old Delhi railway station, was once a waterway.
When I visited
This was the town hall
Delhi,
with the
first time,
Japanese
I
artist.
researched the Yamuna River. Yamuna River is, Yamuna River is very sharp. River is a water, not water. River is a toilet.
The river Yamuna, one of the two most sacred rivers of India, receives liters of sewage and industrial waste per day.
For the solution of water crisis
This was the work
in Delhi,
that she done.
because I have another thinking of water, because I'm a Japanese. This is a chance for collaborative partnership.
Designed by Asim Waqif, the installation also tried to evoke an appreciation of traditional practices in sustainable water conservation.
कभी किसी ने भी नहीं सोचा होगा कि मतलब इस तरीके से पानी की कमी आएगी कि जो मतलब ऐसा है कि मतलब पानी की बोतल खरीद करके हमें पीनी पड़ेगी.
Vivan Sundaram spoke about this deep-rooted concern, the fact that today the symbol of water is reduced to a plastic water bottle. His work was a field of color, created by a grid of symmetrically arranged plastic bottles, and from it sprouted a curious-shaped plastic form, indicating environmental disaster. Various artists brought to notice the shortcomings of urban life today. Alive in Town by Swiss.
Also important, to put out all kinds of practices, all kinds of art, from video to large sculpture to installation, and equally smaller projects which engaged with community. Because, one could say that it was just spectacle, it was so big, but I think it needed to be big in order for people to even notice it and to see it. And I think it was important, again, to say that, all of this is contemporary art, and is it possible? And I know that when a lot of people attended, because we had, one of the reasons that we felt that it was very important to have to kind of create access for public, because they could easily walk past without looking at it, was to have a host of volunteers, both Hindi and English, where they spent a lot of time just asking people questions, talking, initiating a conversation. And I think that really made a difference, because that began conversations around what seemed an artwork, but then there was the sense of, is this art? That was one question. And then very, very animated conversations about water and about the vulture and various things that, that the projects were bringing up. So that was something that we felt was very important.
Dance artists Dalmotis created a community to this fascinating space, inviting them into the park by opening up a whole world of medicinal plants to them.
This was Roshnara Garden. And I think a lot of
Urban eco tours were another public participatory activity.
I think a lot of our monuments, which are seen as historic monuments and kind of kept and looked at only with history, we tend to ignore when you pass them. I know that Kashmiri Gate, people were shocked. When I went to Kashmiri Gate I'd passed it by. I realized that was that little Kashmiri Gate. But it kind of came alive with an art project there, which was Atul had done his project there. He created this huge canister, large size, larger than life size, and then also worked through the day in giving water to the passing public. So it was also very participative in that sense. And including Roshnara Bagh, where Mary Miss, used the idea of it being a botanical garden. We had to work well in advance and worked with several, with a landscape architect who had to find out all the medicinal plants in that space. We sent her all the lists. We had them all translated, and then she worked, of course, to create this absolutely magical space with Mughal pattern. But during the whole festival of 10 days, we had a lot of conversations about Ayurveda, herbal, and she had a lot of these plants which were in a carryover which she would give out to several people. So there was always a process of engagement that was very much part of this. So this is what it looked like. Sorry.
Home away from home for the Mughals, Mary Miss created Roshanara's net. Inspired by Mughal textile patterns, the installation attempted to reconnect the surrounding community to this fascinating space.
Okay, so this is a 15-minute film and I have 5 minutes left. So just to say, this entire project left me with many questions. Left me with even more questions as to what is public art. We tried very hard to animate the places that were being taken away, like the tea stalls at every site. We made them our media hubs, so that was what became very important for everybody to stand around. And I think somewhere along the way, everybody began to feel that there was a possibility of at least having a shared space that could be public, perhaps. So this is about, this film is another, we worked another part of it, and it has a lot of people speaking about and giving their opinions on what they thought of it. But I think just to come to the third question that you asked me, which was what kind of institutional role does Khoj play in defining public art today in India? I don't think it's for Khoj to define public art. It's really to ask many more questions. And I think this was a very big, big project that we did because there was money. It was supported by the Goethe Insitut and GTZ. There was also will of the government at that point. It was very lucky that we were able to get that. We might not have, because some of the projects were exceedingly critical on the edge of that. For example, there was Krishna Raja's big tree on Barakhamba Road with roots and all, which really questioned what it meant to have denuded all of Barakhamba roads. There were some very critical, including Amar's work right there at Jantar Mantar. But I think what Khoj has been doing ever since, and I think one was really motivated after this to continue to do smaller projects, to just chip away if one could. And we said, what does it mean to do similar projects in smaller places? Not similar, but different kinds of art projects which look at ecology, which look at engagement, which talk to art in smaller places, in the peri-urban. And I think since 2010 to 2014, we've been running this project called Negotiating Roots. We're giving about 5 projects, about $1.5 lakh for 3 months to do this project. And we've covered places like, I think Astha was in the hills. We had Sikkim. We had a group doing something in Sikkim. We had, of course, Shweta who's here, who started her first project in Nagpur there. And I think it has showed us that there's a lot of the artists who live in a certain place. Akshay, whose work in All India, Akshay Rathore, whose work in All India has now developed into a much longer engagement with farming and the politics of farm and land. Started with these small projects that we think are very important. And I think for us, we're still trying to see that, they finish, because they're 3 months, that's all we can afford to fund them. But what happens? Do they have a life after that? Is it possible to continue? What does it mean for an artist? What does it mean for that space? You go in there and you come out. And really, what does any of this mean? I mean, is public art there just to entertain, to educate, to animate? I don't know. We're really struggling with that question even at Khoj. And for a long time, the community art projects that we would do, which were spontaneous and small, and some of them very fabulous, we actually stopped for a while because we felt somewhere that the community was being used for art instead of the other way around, and maybe we needed to just back off and really try and make sense of that. So that's our negotiating roots. It's 5 years of that. And we keep questioning what publics are and where can we make smaller interventions to small publics, even if it's for Somalian artists who we work with, or Somalian people in Khirki who we are now doing a very long-term project of storytelling and making into a comic book with the Somalian artists. So it's like we've kind of gone back and forth in Khirki, in smaller, bigger. I have worked on this scale, which has been very, it's just so big, so many more people see it. But I don't know, we're still struggling with many, many questions. Thank you.
So while working in public space, I think one of the aspects is also how our artists and curators are developing their strategies to engage with these sites and spaces. And on this panel, we have Sharmila Samant, who has been engaging with the communities for a very long time. So she's going to talk about a couple of her projects that she has been involved in. Sharmila Samant graduated in sculpture from JJ School of Arts, followed by a diploma in interior design, a fellowship at Kanoria Center, and artist residencies at Rijks Academy in Amsterdam and Gasworks in London. Sharmila was one of the founders of Open Circle, Mumbai-based artist collective that sought to engage with contemporary socio-political issues via an integration of theory and practice. Negotiating in both private and public spheres, Sharmila has engaged in collaborative and participatory art projects with various communities while exploring ideas of exchange, accessibility, and authorship. Her installations and video works have been part of many prominent exhibitions in biennials, museums, artist-led spaces, and alternative venues in India and abroad. She has curated international events, screenings, exhibitions individually and in collaboration. And currently she is Associate Professor at Department of Art, Design and Performance at Shiv Nadar University. Sharmila.
Thank you, Nupur. Thank you, Fika, for inviting me. And thank you all for coming. I'm going to briefly talk about my engagement with, that is what the brief I got from Nupur was, to talk about what I've been doing at the Annabhau Sathe Nagar, which is, a small area which you see in the blue below, which is in Mankur, which is a eastern suburb of Bombay. Now, Annabhau Sathe Nagar lies across the Shivaji Nagar dumping yard, which is the big kind of blue that you see in the other corner. And that entire region is actually the largest dumping yard of Bombay. And all the Lotus Colony, Rafiq Nagar, Annabhau Sathe Nagar, and most of the kind of bastis of Mankur are constantly under demolition. So we've been working there since 2004, which was when the big sort of Vilasrao Deshmukh's plan of turning Bombay to Shanghai was kind of implemented, which meant that they demolished something like, it started in the December of 2004, and they demolished almost 80,000 juggies or slum houses. And I mean, to begin with, there was a sort of unorganized kind of protest, and NAPM, which is the National Alliance of People's Movements, with whom, I mean, both as Open Circle and as individuals, we were involved in. We were sort of supporting whatever was happening. So there were large scale protests which were happening in the city, and people had kind of made a protest site at Azad Maidan, which is the only place, like it's like the Jantar Mantar of Delhi. And I mean, there were daily protests, and the police at that time really came down, and they were really brutal, because it was the first time that Anand Patwardhan, who has been constantly filming all these things which are happening in the city and around in the country, was, I mean, his camera was broken. And Medhatai, who is normally, sort of in the midst of protests, and she's never normally touched by the constables or, by the police sort of officials, she was beaten up. And I mean, it was as if the state really wanted to get rid of all this, and they really wanted a kind of, cosmetic change in the city, and they were all sort of coming down on the people. And that was around the time when the Ghar Banao Ghar Bachao Andolan, which was formed. And I mean, on the other hand, what we were doing through Open Circle was that we had been working with a whole lot of students, and we were looking at vernacular architecture. We were looking at how people made their houses, and we thought of something which was, I mean, it was actually quite a playful kind of attempt by some of the students who were coming to Open Circle. It was a portable house, and then we decided that it had to be under 10 kgs so that people could carry it wherever they wanted. So this was, it was made out of plastic pipes and flex, which was thrown away from advertising posters and things like that. And it was just things that we were working on. We were looking at how a boot polish box works, and looking at space, at design, at architecture, so as to form a kind of alternative, house, so that as there were these constant slum demolitions, we thought it might just be nice to produce something like that. We also had a street photography workshop at that time. This was not anything to do with, let's say, the Andolan or the other activities of which we were a part of. This was led by Caroline Drake and Ben, who had come from England. And we got a mix of some street children, students of the art college, I mean, housewives, and, people who were interested in photography. So we got them together, and we had this kind of workshop on street photography. Now, one very interesting thing that happened was the girl in yellow who you see is one of the girls who came for the street photography workshop. And she was actually staying in Mankur, and Gulistan was an amazing photographer. It was like surprising to see the kind of work that she was doing when she had held the camera for the first time. And there was another girl who was more or less her age, but who was from the Bandra School of Art. And we were working also with Sathi, which is an NGO that sort of organizes street kids. And Sathi wanted some kind of documentation of people's stories, which could be then circulated amongst other children. And Gulistan had a rather interesting life, and one of the girls who was her age but from an art college was Medha, and Medha actually decided that she would make a comic book on Gulistan's life. So we made a series of these, books which started from that workshop. In the meantime, it was actually May, and the people in the Azad Maidan were protesting in the full heat of the Bombay summer. So we thought that also, as is usual after about 3 or 4 months, though the people were protesting and for them it was an everyday thing, the press had really lost interest in what was happening at the Azad Maidan. There were more than 100 families which were there every day, and I mean, they were living there. So what we decided as Open Circle was to, bring some kind of energy back into the protest. So we asked the children and women to paint the banner. It was almost like a 35 to 40 feet long banner. And it also provided shade for the camp itself. And also it was a time for the press to come back and view what was happening at the Azad Maidan. In the meantime, at the Open Circle office, there were a whole lot of books which were being created for with the stories from, let's say, from the Andolan itself. Then, one of the things that we asked Gulistan was the reason why from Azamgarh she was in Bombay. And she said that it was because it was the most beautiful city that she saw. And she had seen it in the films. So then I asked her that what part of, Bombay has she seen and what was it that brought her to Bombay. And she said it was actually the gateway of India. And I asked her, how did it feel when you went and stood in front of the gateway? And she said, Didi, main abhi tak wahan nahi pahunchi. So then we did a kind of small project which was like wish fulfillment, which meant that we asked her for about 8 to 10 places in Bombay that she had wanted to visit. And then we took her to all those 8 places. So 2 consecutive Sundays, Sunday or Saturday, I forget, maybe it was a Sunday, we kind of took Gulistan, and she would, like, the image below is a picture taken by Gulistan, and then we would take a picture of her taking the picture. So there was a book of postcards which was made similarly, and she kind of visited all these 8 or 10 places. In the meantime, Open Circle was invited for the Busan Biennial. And then while we were researching Busan, we realized that the thing that was happening in Bombay at that time was something that had happened in Busan about 25 years earlier. And the entire sort of center of Busan was actually pushed out. And all the people who lived in vernacular housing there were pushed out, and it was completely gentrified. And the worst thing was that they were still fighting for their rights from wherever they had been spread out to. So I thought it might have been a good idea to kind of see what was happening in Bombay at that time and take it to Busan and form a kind of link between what was happening, what had happened there, and what was happening here. So, as I said, a whole lot of books were in the meantime being produced. This were about protests. There were artists or art students who were making the books. Then we realized that within the camp, in a place like Bombay, there were starvation deaths within the camp and also around. So this was like a little booklet which talked of how people, even within a city so close to, let's say, a hospital, were actually facing starvation deaths. So it kind of exposed the kind of apathy of the state towards a certain kind of people which it decides are not wanted within the city. So, it was called Portable Gurukul, the project which was shown in Busan. So I had made a film, and then I had designed a bag, which was, also what had happened was, because of the demolitions, not only were houses and shanties being razed to the ground, in a place like the Annabhau Sathe Nagar itself, there were more than 10 schools which had also been demolished. So a school, when the Jivanshala started, when some of the people went back and started living in Annabhau Sathe Nagar, looked like this. It was just tarpaulin on the floor and a tin shed. So we designed this bag which could be made into a desk, and these were distributed so that the classroom suddenly looked like a classroom. And of course the kids were very, very happy to get a gift, because they had lost so much, and then suddenly to get something which meant also a kind of bonus for them to kind of go back and study was a kind of gift at that time for people who had really suffered a lot. Also, it had retractable legs. So, because normally if you see in a basti, then the most common, at least in Bombay, the most common thing that you have is a charpai. So you could actually raise it to a charpai length, and it was still functional. And as the Busan Biennial was very generous at that time, we could produce about 45 such bags, and they were distributed. There itself, at the Biennale, we put 2 of the bags as prototypes, and then the photographs of the bags and the film. And there was a internet kind of console which was put, where what was happening in Bombay was kind of described and written about, and links were placed, and people from there could then either read about it, or they could even contact some of the Ghar Banao Ghar Bachao Andolan leaders. Yes, we were trying to protect the Azad Maidan from actually the sun. But soon the rain started, and that was the year when the Bombay cloud burst happened. And then water, and how water plays such a, the Mithi River flooded. And then at the same time, there was the Bandra Varli link, which was being built, because of which the Machimar colony was almost destroyed. They lost their, you know about these places, right? So I don't have to go into details about it. So, there were the Machimar colony which was protesting. Then there was the Sezes, which were near Bombay, where groundwater was being sucked up for a place like the Essel World, or, which is a water park, a theme water park. And then of course there was the lack of potable water within the city, and there was the water mafia. So it seemed as if every kind of water, whether it was the coastal waters or the big dams, or within the urban sort of water supply, everything seemed to be under attack. So we had this 1-day long festival, which was at the Kala Ghoda. Now, the thing is, being from Bombay, we know how to, none of this was with permissions. And many a times in Open Circle, we did not take permissions, because we believed in, this kind of subterfuge within to do things that we wanted to do. The thing is, the Rampart Row is a very strange place. One side of the pavement belongs to one police chowki, and the other one belongs to the other police chowki. So if you are on one side, let's say near the Max Mueller, then you can very easily walk across and the police can't catch you till the police chowki there comes, and then you can walk back, because there is no kind of communication between them, and they'll never come together. So we always, and we learned this, of course, from the drug peddlers. So that's what they do. So we learned it. And this was across the Max Mueller in Bombay. It was like replicating the dam, and it was kind of interactive in the sense each of them looked like a brick which had unfretted the Narmada, ya Narmada ko behne do, and whoever had to come across to see the program had to actually pick up a brick and then make way and come. So, and they could carry those bricks home. So it was like a, gesture of bringing the height of the Narmada, of the Sardar Sarovar Dam down. And one of the most amazing things, because I mean, already the Jala Samadhis had started in the Narmada, in the valley. So for the Holi sort of festival, in regions of Nandurbar, the Adivasi Bhais kind of, they dress up as animals and they have this major dance. And for this festival, more than 100 Adivasi Bhais had actually come and they got dressed. And they actually, when they came down, they have this strange kind of reverberating sound of the bells and the goads. And you know, it was almost as if the whole traffic stopped. There were a number of kind of things which were done. This was called Changing Currents. It was a one-day-long event. It started at about 9 in the morning with the Adivasi dance. And then it ended at about 9 in the evening. We were at one of the places which is not usually sort of looked at by the art community, which is the the Natural Sciences and Environmental Studies building, which is just around the corner. And we had a series of lectures, we had films, then there were talks and discussions which happened. And yeah, it was basically trying to get a lot of people to understand what was happening with the water in and around the city. Objects were made. Then we talked about the 8 companies which are actually guzzling groundwater in and around Bombay, and they are selling Bisleri and these kind of things, whereas a private person cannot even make a well in their backyard. So these guys take up something like, you know, a few lakh tons of metric tons of water every day, whereas other people can't even make a small well for their personal use. And of course, children from the Balwadis in the Annabhau Satenagar have always been part of these. I mean, that installation which you see very briefly was a series of water containers which was placed. It was done by the people of the Annabhau Satenagar itself. Then, I mean, yeah, these were a lot of kind of, you know, interactions which were happening with Open Circle and let's say at the Annabhau Satenagar. And then I was invited for a public art project by Art Oxygen and Mohile Parekh. And there I decided to again look at how water was sort of available within the metro. So we looked at water in the city, in the fort area, and in a place like the Annabhau Satenagar. I had actually collaborated with Dr. Amar Joshi, who is a geologist and also a water diviner. And we actually looked for water under the city, under the Kalagoda region and in Annabhau Satenagar. What we realized was that the quality of the water in the Annabhau Satenagar is really poisoned because of the big Shivaji Nagar dumping yard, which is just across the highway, if you remember the map that I had shown you. And so the quality of water is not of human consumption. And but anyways, you know, it was decided, because I have been constantly in touch with the people in Annabhau Satenagar itself, and they thought that even if there was water for other utilitarian purposes, it might be good enough. So we decided that we would make a well. And see, you have to understand, Annabhau Satenagar is a very strange area. It is owned actually by 3 kind of agencies. One is the Ahmed Oil Mill, which has got it on lease for about 100 years for something like 2 lakh rupees in 1975, which means they're paying something like 166 rupees a month. The second is Mahada, which is like the Delhi, Delhi board. And the third is the BMC, that's the Bombay Municipal Corporation. Now, because MHADA is also involved, it means that it can very easily be made for low-income housing. But the Ahmed Mills, which has been a defunct kind of factory since 1979, actually owns it and doesn't let people in. So there is the security which will, beat up people if they put up their houses. Then the BMC comes and raises their houses down. And then the MHADA kind of gives them small funds to build something. So it is like a catch-22 situation. Someone will help them to build, and someone will come and break it down. And it's a great vote bank, because there are about almost close to around 3,000 juggis, which means around 10 people, 10 to 15 people. So, every election or just before the election, it is the time to give them, let's say, taps or toilets or build a road. But the moment people win the elections, things change totally. So at the time when I was there, they had about 30 taps 25 taps for 3,000 families. And so water was really a big problem. What I did was, after we found the spots where water could be found, we marked them. Then I produced this lamp, which was sold at Kala Ghoda. And the money that we got from there was given into the basti, and everybody gave shramdan, which means that the labor we didn't have to pay for. We only had to pay for actually the material. Now the thing was, I first thought that we should have a big well. And then it was when we were talking with the people there, the women said that pani kharab ho jayega. Yahan pe bahut dukh hai. So I had no clue what that meant. So then I was told that because there is always, fights and domestic trouble within the slums, somebody might just go and commit suicide. And if that happens, then nobody is going to take water from the well. So we decided that we have to look at different kinds of wells. And then there was a design which was there in a neighboring basti. And so we decided to adopt that. And we made actually 4 wells. And you see the quality of water that comes out. It was okay for, cleaning or whatever, but it was not meant for drinking at all or cooking. And Santosh, Simpreet, Amina Bai, all these people are the ones who were with whom discussions happened constantly for us to kind of go ahead. Okay, for another project, I had decided that there was a huge, you saw what the ground looked like. It is a large dump. We tried to clean it up, and we thought that we'll make a small garden there. And we spent a lot of money to actually clean up everything. We got people to help, and we cleaned up the place. And then when I went there one Friday, I was told that actually nobody is interested in making the garden. So I was like, oh, but I've worked so hard on this project for almost five months. So why is this sudden thing of not doing? Okay, what happened was after that, Ghar Banao Ghar Bachao has also been fighting, and we actually got about 120 taps in a period of 6 months after the wells were made. So now the wells were of no use, very frankly. So we thought that we would use that to water the gardens and have a garden where you could actually produce food for the community itself. And then when we cleaned up the place, I was told that actually nobody is interested in making the garden. It's too much of work. And then slowly it was Amina who told me that actually, we can sell these plots of land for a much higher price. And so they wanted to, each one who had a house next to the plot wanted to make juggis which could then be rented. So then I had to say, okay, this is not what you want. Then what we did was we had a series of workshops. We learned biophonics, and we kind of, taught women how they could grow things in waste baskets and like bottles and things like that. We grew tomatoes. It's the easiest thing to grow. And then I also was talking with some of the young boys who said that maybe we should, find livelihood with the idea of the garden. So then we proposed something called Ring-a-Lawn, which meant that we were going to have a truck in which there was going to be a lawn with, this is the drawing of the chairs in the lawn, and you could actually call, and like in a place like Bombay, a lawn is fantastic, even if it's like, just the size of a handkerchief. So, and the boys were going to actually look after it. So they were going to take these trucks and earn money, and you could rent the lawn for like an hour and in the evenings or in the mornings or something like that. But then it became really very expensive, and by that time I had also kind of started working on the library, and I had given this project to them, but they didn't want to take it further, so it kind of again collapsed. And do we have time for the other one? No. Okay, so that's it. Thank you.
Our next speaker, thank you, Sharmila. Our next speaker is Ravi Agarwal. Ravi Agarwal, as you all know, is an artist, environmental activist, writer and curator. He has pursued an art practice integrally with his other pursuits. His earlier work in the documentary era encompasses nature, work, labor and the street, while his current engagements are about issues of urban space, ecology and capital in interrelated ways, working with photographs, videos, performance, on-site installations and public art. Ravi has shown in several international shows, including Documenta 11th in 2002, Horn Please in 2007, Indian Highway in 2009, as well as several national shows and solo shows. In 2011, Agarwal co-curated a Twin City public art show, Yamuna Elbe Public Art Outreach. He writes extensively on ecological issues and is also founder of the leading Indian environmental NGO Toxic Link. Ravi Agarwal.
Thank you, Nupur, for inviting me, and I might need some help here. So I'm going to speak mostly about, Nupur posed 3 questions to me, and to prepare for this, and I'll speak sorry. Okay, I'll just use this. To the public art project which I was invited to co-curate. Yeah, so this is the project I was invited to co-curate by the Goethe Insitut, the city of Hamburg, and later the government of Delhi became a partner in this. So I'll first, it's a 2-site project in Hamburg and Delhi, and based on the idea of the 2 rivers. And as you know, there's a river called the Elbe which flows through Hamburg, and this river Yamuna, which we all know, flows through Delhi. These are 2 pictures of the 2 sites of the thing. My co-curator was an artist from Hamburg called Till Krause, and both of us started out first trying to conceive of what are the ideas along which we think of this project. And I'll present that to you first, and then try and answer to the other 2 questions, which to the structure of the project I'll present to you, because that was of prime importance to us. We wanted to see the connect about the idea of the river and the idea of ecology in 2 cities, in 2 different spaces, 2 different economic spaces, 2 different historical, with different histories of different kinds of history, all kinds of different histories. And we want to see what is the unifying thing between those 2 cities. And as we discovered, I went to Hamburg, he came to Delhi, discovered that the idea of the river was very much contested in both the places. And that was really something which we wanted to work on, because normally one assumes that, the common narrative is that one day Delhi will become like London, and we'll have, the Yamuna will be like the Thames. And so what we wanted to talk about was that the idea of ecology and the idea of the river, both as an urban idea, as an urbanization idea, but also as an idea which gets somehow with progress, the questions of ecology get resolved, are both not true. So there was a big contestation in Hamburg about how deep the Elbe should be, because, as you know, the Elbe, Hamburg is a river port, and one of the largest ports in the world, along with Antwerp and Rotterdam. And the big question was that if you allow the big ships to come into Hamburg, then you have to deepen the river. But if you deepen the river, you set in motion all kinds of ecological changes. And also the biodiversity changes, the fish movement changes. And the Hamburg Elbe is also has embankments on both sides for about 250 years. And the question in Delhi, of course, we have embankments in 1977, since from the last major flood, which went into the city. So, but they want to demolish the embankments because they find that there's a lot of problems when you make the embankments. So we were actually following the same trajectory which Germany on Elbe had followed since around the early 19th century. And there's a whole history, we wanted to think of the whole history of institutional history of Institute of Ecology, and also how the idea of ecology is kept out of the social contract in the history of ideas. That ecology, nature is always thought of as a free gift. And the idea of limits of nature is only very currently generally accepted through the climate change discussions and the Anthropocene discussions, that the planet is actually changing by human intervention. It's a very new kind of thing. So that the marginality of the idea of ecology, which sort of connects two economies, and the difficulty that the idea that it is not resolved in either places. So what kind of trajectories do we think of when you think of ecology? The other thing was about the issues of, there's an interspecies ideas of ecology. That means what happens with human intervention with other species. But there's also intraspecies ideas of ecology. That means how does ecology read into the history of capital, or read in readings of power or within society and different access to something. And we could easily see that in the Yamuna, and that question became very critical to the choosing of the site in Delhi, as I'll come to, and in Hamburg as well. You could easily see that because a site in Delhi was where there was till a few years back one of the largest settlements, what you call slum settlements of 150,000 people, which were displaced. And the third thing which I just mentioned is in the history of institutionalization. And we've seen that since the early 19th century, when you institutionalized urban spaces, the land was controlled by the Land Development Agency, and the water was controlled by the Flood Agency. And there's a whole history of something called the Rhine Commission, which exists even now, where they went out and tried to straighten the Rhine in a manner in which they took all the oxbow curves out, made it a straight navigable river. It's only now in the last 15, 20 years they want to restore it, but you can never restore it. So you see the DDA here, which controls the land, and we encountered this physically when we went for clearances. They control the land, and the Flood and Irrigation Department controls the water flow. And so what happens to something which is the membrane between the two, which is little porous, as in the floodplains. And you see there is no thinking about, there's no institution which has an investment in that ecological space. So there's all these things which became important to thinking about the project. And the second thing we were very keen to do was to look at the public discourse, because we were looking at public discourse as part of the public sphere. Not the site came later, but what is the public discourse through which we enter the project? What are we trying to address when we're trying to think of interventions? And the discussions were very different in Hamburg than in Delhi. In Hamburg, of course, the Yamuna is, the Elbe is no longer a cultural body. It's in a traditional sense. They find it beautiful, and they have this whole walkways around the Elbe. But nobody thinks of the Elbe as in any kind of mythological terms. That's completely lost now. in Delhi, it's a very common thing to think of the Yamuna as goddess and think of the Yamuna as part of a whole mythology. So how you locate, when we want to think of publics, then how do we locate these two discussions? What are we trying to address? So this is what something we very keen to put it in the right discourse, and then think of everything else. Now, so the public discourse in Delhi was very much, as I mentioned, that one day will be like the Elbe or like Thames. The second was that the river is very important because it's water supply, but it's not an ecological space. So now the idea that river was important for drinking water, and simultaneously to dump sewage in, but not as something which has an interspecies relationship or has a planetary relationship to the either floodplains or to fertility or to other species. And the third was that the poor pollute the river, and that was a sort of a narrative which was very much there. So we made these 4 statements to the people we invited to the show, that what happens if economy is replaced by the word ecology, in the premise that all capital is created by natural resources, but ecology is treated like a free gift, but economy is central. What happens if we replace the words? How does everything else change? The second was about how does the land appear from the river. So we have a perception of river or of nature. When we reverse that perception, how does things change from the human to the non-human perception? The progress or urbanization does not address the question of ecology. And is the river public space? Is it free? But whose river is it? Is it a common good or not? And so then through this, we wanted to attempt that we wanted to increase through this project engagement with the idea of public space, that we wanted to address various kinds of publics, not only one kind of public. So the siting became a question we wanted to address as far as we could understand it. And we were talking about more elite public or more poor people or who live along the river. Also, we were keen that we were not used for gentrification. There's a whole history of gentrification. In fact, the first site we were offered in Hamburg was in a place where there were immigration communities living, a lot of Turkish people living there. And we said we don't want to do it here because we can't do a project in 1 year with the immigration community because we don't know what they want. And we discovered later there was also a plan to gentrify that area, that the land was going to be sold to something. So we didn't want to be used as far as possible for that purpose. And we wanted to create a broad involvement in the city because lots of people are working on the river in Delhi and in Hamburg. It was not just us trying to say, and of course we didn't want to be saying, oh, those people are doing art. We wanted to make it a collaborative thing, or at least make it something which gives people space to do their own operations of to present what they are doing along the river. And this was also an attempt to how to create publics, different kinds of publics on the river. We started the project on a discursive note because we had a multidisciplinary seminar which was held here in the Goethe Insitut in the library in 2010 December, a year before the project took place. And as you can see from the list, it's got all kinds of people. It's got artists, some of whom are in the room, but it also has urbanists, urban designers, geologists, policy people, all kinds of people. And this is all on the web. You can see it's all recorded. There's a website which but the interesting thing was, when some of the scientists came up to say that it was so interesting talking in the seminar because we could say what we felt. Because if you are in a seminar with other scientists, you have to be very clear about your disciplinary statements. Everything you're saying is mentioned within your disciplinary hypothesis. So they could say what they really felt, and that means they were bringing other kinds of observations which are not necessarily part of their disciplinary the way they would create knowledge in a disciplinary way. Quickly about the site in Hamburg. The site, we declared a certain area, a notional area on the map, which was this area which you see in the red. We called it the Free River Zone. And then in Hafen City, and Leonard would know that Hafen City is one of the most expensive sites in Hamburg. 10 minutes? 5 minutes in Hamburg, and it's where the river is, and we dragged a barge from a long distance away, and we parked it there, and that became the site of a month-long engagement. This is a picture you've seen. Atul's here. Atul's performative work. Atul was one of the artists invited. This is the barge you see. And this is the top left is Navjot's work, and the other works you see. So it was, of course, artist work, but they were social scientists, natural scientists who came and spoke there, and there were many kind of events which kept happening throughout the whole. So that was the intervention there. In Delhi, of course, you don't have the same kind of interaction with idea-based work in public art, so it had to be more of a spectacle. And we chose the Golden Jubilee Park, which incidentally, as images shows, where 150,000 people lived in 2004. In April 2004, they were bulldozed out. And when we started digging, this was a dig we made for Gigi Scaria's installation. It was like an archaeological dig, because we found layers of plastic, layers of sand, layers of plastic, layers of sand. So it was layers of plastic, then every year the flood came, it became sand. And so it was, so these are pictures in 2009. This is in 2010, because it's a floodplain, and this is in 2011 when the project took place. So it's a transient piece of land, right? Transient water, transient land, and of course we discovered through the project this whole project by the DDA to make a whole complex there, which we ultimately then were able to stop through other measures, and this all came up during the project. So there was a whole plan of rebuilding that whole riverfront. The question, of course, of what is public space is very difficult to answer, and I'm not sure it's specific only to here. In Hamburg also, you have to take clearances for everything, but only. So these were the clearances I got, and just as a small incident, on the night of the before the opening, at 1 o'clock when I had finished installing, the head of the police station came to us and said, "Your clearances are cancelled." So I sort of laughed in his face. He said, "Pack up and go home." I said, "Well, tomorrow morning, let me sleep over it." I called Robin Malik at 2 o'clock in the morning. He said, in Zen-like, he said, "Sleep over it tomorrow morning, we'll see what happens." And of course, then, as things came to pass, we got hold of people, and while the clearances were being signed, the inauguration, the chief minister was inaugurating the thing, and the policeman was saying, "After the inauguration, we're going to close it. We can't close it with the chief minister there." So we said, okay, after the inauguration is another 15 minutes away. And by the time Shweta called me and said, "I've got the clearances." So it was quite a nightmare to think of how these places are thing. And of course, when you think of physical public spaces today, you think of the idea of security, because for 2 days the festival was closed, because they want to sanitize the area, because on 14th of November, Jawaharlal Nehru's birthday, evidently the Prime Minister or somebody comes there, and they close the whole riverbank. The project was, so I will stop here. I will not talk about the project per se, but it was, I come back to the first two questions which she asked me, which Nupur asked me, and I think that'll be just on time. Let's go back. Well, one of the questions she asked me, what's the role of the curator, and as an so we had decided, Till and I had decided that after we decide the contours of the project, and after we decide who's going to be part of it, and what are the kind of collaborations then after that we said we are facilitators and organizers. We did not want to. We wanted to really speak with people who wanted to do one thing or the other. So we were surprised, like with Asim's thing, there's a lot of surprise in what happened. But so it was a surprise for us also. But we were very happy with the surprises, because we did not see ourselves as anything but facilitators from that point in time. And that was a political sort of how we look at it ourselves. And when personal question about, artists, this is a question I I'm asked all the time, and I have no good answer to it, except that, I see no difference between, they're just different public forums of acting, different ways of acting, different ways in which I interact with the world. And I have some concerns, I have some connections which I feel strongly about, and that's where everything flows. And then there are different forms of engagements. I don't differentiate between them in terms of they're equally important to me. Some are more personally important, some are, I think, important as my role as an artist, I'm trying to finish on time. My role as an artist, activist, curator, these multiple labels which are, and these labels many people carry, and because I am very actively an activist, then I think that word is asked of me more often. Though I think many artists are activists in very different ways. So, but because I'm sort of acting directly in policy, in law, etc., then some ask that question. And there's a lot of slippage from one to the other. But of course, it needs to be said that each of them occupies a different space in terms of social space and political space, and your expectations of the space are different. So I found it easier to be multiple roles in Europe. It's difficult, much more difficult to be multiple. I think the concerns and the pressures on people are very different. So if you are like an artist going into an activist space, then it's a very complex situation to be there. So either you decide what you want to be. I remember Arundhati's famous statement when she was working with the Narmada, and in the end she said, "Look, I'm just a writer. I'm just observing." So So it's very much trying to see what your role is. But for me, it becomes much more complicated. And sometimes many things which are community action or something, I don't even get into an artistic kind of definition for myself, because there's a way in which people perceive you, and they expect you to do a certain kind of role. So I sort of go along with that also. Thank you.
Thank you, Ravi. Last speaker for today's seminar is Astha Chauhan. Astha specialized in sculpture both in her BFA, completed at Government College of Art in Chandigarh, and MFA at New Delhi College of Art. Between 2005 and 2010, she headed the community-based art initiatives at Khoj International Artists Association in Delhi. She's interested in socially engaged art and collaborative practices. Astha's practice is rooted in the urban village of Khirki in Delhi, where she has worked for more than a decade on projects ranging from an independent zero-budget street art festival to project focusing on urban design, redevelopment, and recently a hip-hop fashion brand called Khirki 17 with the local youth. She is also interested in micro broadcasting and works closely with 90.4 Henvalwani community radio station in Chamba, Uttarakhand. In 2014, she was awarded the Brooks Fellowship at the Tate Modern in collaboration with the Delphina Foundation, and in 2011, the INLAC Scholarship. Astha currently also teaches at Srishti Institute of Art and Design and Technology in Bangalore.
Thank you so much for having me as the last speaker. I hope you all are not too bored. I'll try and make it as quick and painless as possible. It's an honor to be here simply because a lot of the people, co-panelists, are people and artists and curators who I've worked with for Bhavan, Ravi, Pooja, all of them, and have influenced my practice, of course, in many ways. So, yeah, for those of you, I mean, most of you probably been to Khirki and know what Khirki and Khoj and that space is. So within Delhi, South Delhi, there's the Khirki Masjid. That's how the neighborhood gets its name. It's a 14th century mosque, which is now against this gorgeous big mall, actually 12 malls and offices now. And this is the in-between space between the mall and Khirki, which is like this no man's zone where all the dumping from the illegal construction that happens in Khirki is thrown. And this is Khirki on our side. This is Khoj in 2004, when I was there for my student residency. And this is the first work I did in the neighborhood, which was a mural with just very simple, with no idea what it means to intervene in communities. No intention of spending so much time there, and I don't know where it will go from here, but this was the beginning at some level. Just a mural. The community came together, watched it as a spectacle, and it was the first, hello, how are you? And then many projects happened after that. But I'm going to skip straight to 2008. When the mall was getting constructed, a lot of the labor would leave their children on the pavement to just play or do whatever while they made the mall. And at that time, a lot of the labor that constructed the mall also lived in Khirki. And this is the summer break in 2008. And just to watch them every day make toys out of matchboxes and Coca-Cola caps, I thought actually the lal mitti is so cheap, no? And as a sculpture student, we knew how to set up a foundry. And at that time, cows and buffaloes were still in the neighborhood because this is the village area. So it was easy to get cow dung cakes. So for 3 months, we ran a workshop in the park and made 800, 900 toys and set up the foundry in the park, which the children would look after at night while we were away. In the day, we would come and dismantle some of the toys that they made. And this is actually the point where I met most of the collaborators that I still continue to work with. And Nupur specifically asked me to discuss participation from the end of the people who are the collaborators who worked with me for so many years or have allowed me to work with them for so many years. In that yellow and orange striped shirt is Sandeep, and he will continue to come up in all my projects till the last one. This again, Nupur said I should bring up it. This is one of the Khoj grants under Arts Council, I think, to map the neighborhood with the medicinal plants, to understand 1 square mile of Khidki. But I was asking people about home remedies and basically to look at how medicines, and especially off-the-counter medicines and quick healing remedies, have killed the way we interact with plants. So a lot of edible plants like petunia and Merriweather periwinkle or even neem have actually disappeared from the neighborhood, leave alone us using aloe vera for anything. And I spoke to the dietitian at the Max Hospital. This is Mastan Baba, who sits outside the Max Hospital, who gives tabis and medicine, is an expert at male virility, and at 68 got a woman pregnant. So he's gave me some very good advice on what medicines can be had. He used to get a lot of plants from where the mall is constructed now. So 2006, when the mall started coming up, he had to travel all the way to Badaयूं to get his plants now. This is a small Jugadu transmitter that we built, and I broadcast the audio that I'd collected from the neighborhood into a small audio program, and that's the transmitter, antenna, and my radio station. For 2 days, I managed to broadcast illegally, and then I got too scared and shut it down. But you could hear the audio program in the range of the neighborhood at least. Let's see if it'll play. It's all playing. But these are some of the advices that came. The audio is available on SoundCloud if anyone wants to hear. That's Mastan Baba just last week. He's hale and hearty and ready to produce more children. In 2012, this is the first independent project I'd done. Basically, Khidki had been under a lot of demolition and buildings are breaking, and one building particularly had come down 6-7 times. Plus a lot of my friends, architects, designers thought, can we do something? Also, it started as one of the workshops where one barber asked me if we could do a shop makeover with him, because there are too many barbers on the street and the only way people will come to him is if some artist does something nice. So starting from there, it developed into what became Extension Khidki. We didn't have it is a zero budget festival, so the artist got most of the material. His name is Aditya Kaushik. He's a property dealer, has been friends with me for a long time now and continues to be. He gave us his shop to use as the festival hub. This is what we did to it. Meanwhile, Tiny Drops is a hip-hop community center which has also emerged. And that's Sandeep, the orange and blue t-shirt guy, is in the flowery blue on the corner right. And he's become a hip-hop star by 2008, or at least started rapping and understanding what it means. I'm not sure where to pin why hip-hop became so big in India, but I know that between 2008 and 9, this wave of Indian Americans came back with this energy, which the kids really identified with, whether it was about identity or the way in which they perceived MTV or cool. I'm not sure. I'm still trying to get my head around it. But hip-hop changed the scene in a big way for the youth. So that's Hira and Radhika, the two people who actually came from the States to Khoj actually for the first workshop and then set up their own space. And in 2000? For a year. So the kids then for this festival also came and they helped us with sourcing material or generally helping the artists during the festival. A lot of musicians called and said, this sounds like fun, and it had no structure. So we started with 3 friends, and in 2 weeks we had musicians, other people calling up and saying, okay, I'm coming. And actually we had a great festival. At the end of it, the hip hop crew also did a performance for us. I have a video which I think I'll skip because it's too long. Aapki Sadak was a project basically, Khidki has seen waves and waves of very interesting people come and go. And Ashok Lal as an architect plus Pradeep Sachdeva and the buildings of Ramu Kattakam, there's this whole architectural, and Bhalla, Ribeiro Bhalla and Stefan Pommier, they've all been part of Khidki in some way. But Ashok Lal took the time out to actually get involved with what was happening on the street infrastructurally and has worked many years ago to try and make a proper street with herringbone pattern tiles so that it would be easy for the people to sort out drainage and lay the wire and all of that. But it didn't work, and overnight the soak pit that he had created, which sloped towards one shop, was filled by the shop owner because he didn't understand what Ashok sir was trying to do, I guess, at one level. So when Aapki Sadak started, he invited me to come on board with his team to see if we could map one area of Malviya Nagar. This basically, Malviya Nagar police station says that 90% of the cases and complaints they get are parking related violence. There's a lot of anxiety around it, guns get pulled, people get beaten up, it's uncomfortable. So one was that idea that, so this mural is basically about that anxiety of parking, and Lal sir thought that if visually we could get to make these gestures in public places, maybe people will start to talk about it. Maybe this is a good way to start the conversation. So between the Malviya Nagar metro station and the high capacity bus corridor, there are 3 neighborhoods. And we wanted to see if between these neighborhoods, everyone can agree along this corridor that we don't need our cars, we can walk to the metro station and create public consensus around it. So over 8 months to a year and a half, we did constant workshops every Sunday in the local parks along that route, and basically marked out where do you walk to, what are the problems you face, what are the suggestions from the local community. And of course the large question was, if you had an option, would you walk to the metro? And everyone said, yay, yes, of course. And for every neighborhood we had created this sort of information sheet that was shared with the urban designers, who used these suggestions to create what an alternative map of the neighborhood could look like. That's Ashok sir in the middle. Ashok sir was very clear with me that the elderly janta is going to be super cynical and say kuch nahi ho sakta and all. Bachcho se pucho. And even I really enjoy working with the youth. So it was the kids. What are the shortcuts? Where do you cycle to? To start identifying the already existing non-motorized corridors. And along those corridors, we did stencils of the lost trees of Khidki. So we found out that there was jamun trees and these trees. So we did stencils of those leaves along corridors that the kids had demarcated as already existing non-motorized corridors. That's Sandeep helping us with the stencils. He also wrote a beautiful rap about how rich kids drive cars and poor kids get run over, and did a flash mob with the children from Shivalik A block, which is a fairly rich neighborhood, and the minute they saw Sandeep, half the kids left. But when he started to dance, they all turned around and came back, and they did this collective flash mob and stopped the traffic and really reclaimed the street for that 10-minute period. And I expected there to be a lot of noise because Malviya Nagar is very sensitive about their cars. But there wasn't. They all came out with their phones and made videos. It was quite sweet. Sorry, one sec. We also did a campaign called Chalo Kyuki, which means walk because. And we invite people to fill in the blanks. So walk because why? It was an online as well as a physical campaign. So, and whoever shopkeepers, house owners agree that Malviya Nagar in this stretch we don't need cars, and we agree to make it non-motorized, a bit like the ant symbol that you had shown of people who agree, completed the sentence and allowed us to paint it outside the house. So, chalo kyunki mausam suhana hai, shanti milegi, gaadi kharab hai, hum chalenge, desh chalega. And there's already a last mile connectivity corridor that the Malviya Nagar Metro started, which stalled for some reason. So Anpu and Aditya, 2 friends, did a lovely mural to make the experience of the pedestrians who are already using the corridor a little more enjoyable, I suppose. There's a local school called the Swan Public School, with who I've worked many times in the past on coach projects and otherwise, with a theatre group called Purple Mango. So we did a play. The kids had to imagine what would be their sapno ka sadak, jahan pe they can play cricket, jahan pe ice cream lene ke liye they don't get run over a car, and bacha party. And this is also the same time Aam Aadmi Party is campaigning for the first round of elections. Very interestingly, so there's a certain amount of optimism in the air. Everyone's feeling like things can change. And so when these kids come and do a nukkar natak, which is about bachcho ki party and sadak ko reclaim karna, it hit home, I think, somewhere. After it took us a long time, this project. The plans that were developed by the urban designers, meanwhile, then again we start to display them in public parks. Everyone says, great. The hip hop kids come back. We do another big performance in the park, again, over a few weekends. And ultimately, this entire documentation or the proposals are displayed at the Malviya Nagar Community Center, where that's the SDMC commissioner. We really had to beg him, drag him to come, but he loved it and he adopted it as the first civic initiative to be implemented. However, the file is stuck, and it's been stuck for a while because it's not the PWD that brought it up. It is actually a civic initiative. Plus in Delhi, municipality, 10 big constituencies are under BJP. And AAP is basically now struggling between the municipality and the city governance. So it's an interesting time to be in this space also, because we saw Aam Aadmi Party come into power, and I fortunately am now working with the party on a few projects. And yet we realize that it's the municipality that's the muscled organization, and they will not let it happen for some reason or the other. But anyway, file pushing is something that I decided I'll put my blinders on and do. Otherwise, artists just keep leaving things as propositions. So let's hope Aapki Sadak actually gets realized. And we had a small exhibition at Khoj at the end to share the project with practitioners who are interested in collaboration. Otherwise, everything just happened on the street, in the local parks, at the local municipality hall. Antarashtriya Khidki I just brought in quickly to say that I'm an accidental activist, I suppose, because I'm not so interested in the idea of race-related violence, but it just happened in Khidki. It so happened that a lot of my friends were African people, that we'd be trying to tell stories since 2012 and 2013 that nobody was writing at that time. And this is a 2013 story now. Nobody was interested at that time, and it is in one of the kitchens of a dear friend of mine. It got vandalized, some drunk mob came, broke all her bottles, stole her laptop, no one's interested. In comes Somnath Bharti, and it becomes a political issue. So I wrote one piece for Yahoo News that got superbly viral, and I'd mentioned that I want to do a festival which happens in its own autonomous space. So there's the police station chakkar because some African friend of yours is in the prison or some shit like that is happening. But there's also, you have to create that other space where there needn't be narebazi, there needn't be fight, but it needs to exist. Some letters that were being very violent or very violent nature that the local resident welfare association was circulating about inka rokthaam karna hai, Nigerian or Kinnar ki rokthaam, which is basically pest control of the Nigerians and the cross-dressers in Khidki. And I took this letter and I went for a Sehmat show, and I literally begged Vivan and Geeta for support, and they gave us a little money, and in 10 days we were able, and all these are volunteers who came together, some artists who were at Khoj who just felt compelled that we need to do something about this. And that's how the festival happened. If the video will play, it'll be nice, but it didn't. This is the latest project. On Saturday, this last Saturday, we launched Khidki 17. So basically, the kids had just, Sandeep and all these boys now I've known for 12 years now. I met him at that park when he was a kid. And he says that, okay, 12th we finished and hip hop gave me a lot of attitude, and now I have to contribute to like expenses at home, and I can't be a waiter because, you know, who stands like that? So I started serving food like that and I got kicked out. So I need to figure out something to do, because the kids in the neighborhood emulate my hairstyle, and 3-4 of them are really cool, so everyone wants to be them. So how about we start our own brand? So I said, great. Now, because I tried consciously not to raise, to apply for funding for projects since 2012, at least the Khidki ones. So it all happens pro bono, it all happens in its due course of time. ये idea अभी 2 साल हो गया उनको school छोड़े हुए, but धीरे धीरे. Pearl Academy got in touch for a workshop. So first workshop we did with the Pearl Academy students and 8-9 of these kids. That's them giggling away because they hated it. So the Pearl Academy kids were taught how to do hip hop and spin, and they taught us how to cut our t-shirts and do something. But finally, while I was at Tate for my workshop, I met a young graphic designer, fashion designer, who was very interested, and she applied for a grant, and she's currently in India. She came in the last month, and basically taught them how to screen print. So that's it. We had a 2-week workshop. 1 week the kids took her to all the markets where they shop at. We got basic material. I've invested a little money from my pocket because it'll be a kick-ass venture, I'm sure. They'll make a lot of money and I'll be rich also. But till then, the basic prints, that's Yemi. And we had the budget for 23 t-shirts. Khoj gave us very kindly a room to screen print for 1 week. And yeah, so over a week we learned whatever we learned while we were making, we also sold at the event. This is, for those of you who are not familiar with the Delhi music scene, it's Delhi Sultanate, or they have 3-4 names actually: Delhi Sultanate, the Base Foundation, etc. And Taru Dalmia does a lot of does a lot of reggae music, and wanted some African audience, of course, to be at his concert. So as a barter system, because I'm well connected with the African community, I got somebody from an African kitchen to make fish for him, and he gave us an opportunity to launch our t-shirt at his event. And we sold out and have made 6,000 rupees, which we will reinvest, and Tuesday is the next sale. You can book your t-shirts. Yeah, I guess that's it. That's Khidki 17.
Thank you, Astha. May I request all the panelists to Sharmila, Ravi, Astha, Pooja. It was interesting to see two curators and who had curated 2 major public art projects in the city of Delhi, and Astha and Sharmila, who have been engaging with a particular neighborhood in Bombay and in Delhi, respectively. And also the role of different institutions that played in these conversations. So maybe Khoj or Open Circle, or also in terms of like both the projects were situated somehow in Goethe Insitut. So different kinds of organizational spaces which also seeped into these conversations around public art and public space, which generated public dialogues and certain intersections. But I'm also interested in the element of friction, which some of you addressed while you were working on. So maybe with the state, with government organizations or communities that you have worked with. So that is one aspect that I would like you to respond. And the other aspect is also, especially for Astha and Sharmila, who have been engaging with the community for a very long time. So what kind of social relationships, I mean, if have you seen a kind of change in the social relationships in the community since you started working, and you have like worked almost like more than a decade in the same location? So if you could.
I mean, I was speaking to Santosh yesterday, and I was telling him that, I'm presenting the project tomorrow. And, well, now he is legal. He's one of those guys who's got a 3-storied house in Annabhau Satenagar, which is now got permissions because they had some sort of legality. And if you were there after some 2000, then you could be legal, and people who are after that cannot be legal, and hence there are about 100 or no, I think about 1,000 houses which have in Annabhau Satenagar, which over the years now have become legal. While yeah, so I mean these kind of changes do happen. Also, as I said, I mean you start something like the water thing that we started with the wells, but now they have their own taps and they have their own sort of municipal water, which is, coming to their houses, which we would have never thought about even 8 years ago when we started the project. And yeah, I mean, it's not just the artist and, the relation within the community which is happening, but I mean, there are activists and there are sociologists, there's this. So many different people are involved with the project. And, as an artist, you're doing your job, which could be at times to get certain attention. It could be, I mean, it depends on, what your role is at that point. And you kind of do that and things move on. Of course, there are a whole lot of people who still are struggling in the same region, in the same areas. And well, the struggle is on. So I mean, even your work as an artist is not sort of stopped.
I had a very tough time for the first 3 years. I'm a woman, I look like a certain type, and what the fuck am I doing in a neighborhood, like doing anything in the first place? It's taken a long time, and even now during the entire Somnath Bharati thing, there were people who were on his side. They smashed my car with all windows, stole nothing, just to prove a point. So you have to face it. Some people will not like you, and some people will. It's like a classroom, it's like this room, it's like family. I have this question of how does the community react to such a generic one? Some will not even know. It's not like the community imagines me as a art practitioner in any capacity. First they must have thought I'm mental. Now whatever they think is definitely not because I'm an artist. It's a different perception. So it's only for this room full of people that we'll try and make sense of what communities mean or how they react. Outside of it, I think it's immaterial.
Yeah, I'm also, how community reacts to your projects, but also within the community. Have you witnessed any kind of change within the community because of the projects that you have been engaging with? That was
for sure. I mean, one of the first hip hop b-boy battles we did in Khidki, we had a fight in the village because it's a Chauhan dominated village and lots of the boys are lower caste. It's a full out and out caste class thing. And they came out and they really beat up the boys to say, why aren't the Chauhan boys doing hip hop? And now that guy just yesterday called me to his NGO to say, I'm going to support poor, kids who are doing well in education. You have advice. So everyone comes around. Also, you have to be honest and at it for a while. If you keep parachuting in and out, then it's going to get tough, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, it's you win some and you lose some. So like there was this German guy who we were working with, and he had he was very generous. He gave like 6 computers to the Annabhau Sathe Nagar neighborhood, and then there was somebody who just would not let them use the room, and then somehow it went around, and then now there are 2 kind of places where they can learn computers, and they are running their own small video center where they talk about news in the neighborhood and things. So I mean, it can start off badly, but then it can progress. But then what happens is there would be a whole lot of these young kids who you're working with who actually grow up and take on the role, which is fabulous. Like, I mean, Santosh, he was a constable. He was one of the guys who came to destroy that place. And then later on, now he has a house there. And now he is protecting the place. So, I mean, these kind of things happen. And, Also, I mean, they know you're an outsider. And you know you're an outsider. And I guess you kind of have mutual respect. And that is all that it is. I mean, yeah.
Yeah, and the first part of the question about the element of friction, if you, Pooja and Ravi, if you would like to address that, which, yeah.
So, what do you want me to say about friction? There's friction, of course.
Yeah.
When you're going out and trying to organize something in public space. Firstly, there's occupying any kind of public space, there's this great sense of they feel very threatened about it. So I remember when I first went to DDA for clearances, they showed me a whole file of letters which they said, you have written to us over the years, so why should we give you clearance? So these are all these kinds of things which work, and I mean, you are just an outsider to the whole process, unless you have some kind of relationships of, through, relations of power, like Shri Ravi Shankar got clearances in 15 days. So this is, yeah, it's very true. It's very true. 15 days he got clearances over 1,000 acres of land, when for 2.5 acres I had to fight for a whole year, and I ultimately almost didn't get clearance. It's just because the Sheila Dikshit's private secretary took a liking to me, and he said, yeah, and he was a photographer. So he said, okay, you should do it. So it really works like that. And then he called up his class fellow who was DSP Delhi and he said, why don't you give them clearance? It works at that level. But not at any other sort of, all these words we use, democracy, equity, they seem like such a big joke. It's so much patronage, so much, kinship, patronage, power structures through which anything operates. So I think we are far cry from what we read in theory about public art and public space and what we see is such a big difference. That's what I discovered. It was just, there's no connection. I remember going with Pooja to the secretary environment when she was doing this, and he was my class fellow earlier. And he said, kya karoge? Flyovers se painting karoge? This is like, so that's the level at which art and artists are treated. That's such a bit.
Not just the environment section, there was also Mrs. Sheila Dixit who said, so you put paintings in roundabouts.
So it's, if you go as an artist, you're actually nobody. You just have no status. You are, what you're doing here, the kind of thing.
On a positive note, just to say that despite the friction, I think if you're able to open that space, which I think you can, by just showcasing stuff there, it kind of helps other things to happen. Because I do know after we did 48 degrees, I think the French did something, and I know it came as a big thing that we were able to have cracked that because the lady of the Alliance said, or not Alliance, the French Center said, we went and we said we want to do something in Rajiv Gandhi, that Rajiv Park, Central Park, and so like 48 degrees. We said very good. So they felt that was safe, it was kosher, it was all right. So I think sometimes just prying these spaces open, ideally it would be great if we could keep them going. I mean, for example, I think one of the other problems is, when Katie was on the, what's it called, the DUAC, he was the chairperson. So after 48 degrees, where he was also an advisor to us, he said, okay, let's all try and really broker these public spaces. There's 2% for every public building. There's so much money out there. How can we make it happen? And I was in one of those meetings where all the PWD people came, and there were several of us, all well-intentioned, all said, okay, let's do something about it. And actually, we were just talking two different languages. The PWD people are saying, well, what is good art? How do we know? For them, doing a bench, putting a mural is fine.
How do we tender for it?
How do we tender for it? What are you talking about? It was just, we were talking, listening to them, you realize that you couldn't have the conversation as we are having, but actually say, okay, can you put in a system, a process in which you have a series of artists, whenever you're putting up public spaces, can you designate those spaces, get us involved, so that once you're doing that, we can put out a call, and then you can choose, you can have some people and decide which are the works that you want, but at least get, just like for an engineer, you get all buildings certified by an engineer. When you do art, get it certified by a curator, or somebody who knows that. How is it that you decide? So, but that is like breaking head. How you are going to intervene in that in a place like this is impossible. We went for 2 meetings and that was the end of it. Katie really tried to push and open those spaces. And I was even saying, okay, forget permanent work, permanent projects. Let's look at 10 sites which we have opened up as temporary exhibition spaces. It can be curated by 1 curator or 2 curators over a year. And then you change it. Maybe that would be worth it. Just in bulk.
Yeah. I think on that note, we'll open the discussion to the audience. Are there any questions from the audience?
I have a selfish question. Any plans for you also, Ravi? For 49 degrees?
Like you're saying, it's very important to constantly engage with these sort of the bureaucracy, the institutions that form part of our cities. And
I think what was really fantastic 10 years ago, 8 years ago, was I think many artists were beginning to develop strategies of how to work in public spaces, different kinds of public spaces, with small communities, big communities, large projects, etc. And I wish we could have had several of these, at least every 3 years, in order to just build on what we had started at that time. And in different ways it has happened. Ravi did that, and then there have been so many smaller projects. I wish we could do a big one, but it takes a lot of money and a lot of... And also, one needs to rethink it, because a lot of the work that we did, one of the things that didn't work, really, about 48, was that we used a lot of energy and we used a lot of material that we had to discard because we produced everything here. So in talking about ecology, what were we really doing? At that time we were really thinking of putting up a really good show. But now if one was to do it again, we'd really have to think hard about how to do that and circumvent that. So.
Today
Connecting to that.
Sorry, please. I just want to respond to. You want to ask?
Connect to that because towards the concluding part of your presentation, you said that it's a good statement basically. Quite can open up discussion that do artists use these communities and spaces in a very selfish manner, that we do something and then we don't give back something. Is it because you said that we have taken a break? I can understand that if you take a break because the administration hassles are too dangerous. But if we take a break because there is some lack of faith in what artists are doing, then the discussion, actually I understand that discussion and we can open up that. That do artists are really using the other for their own artistic imaginations. And if that thing is happening, then we're at a very critical point. That either we accept that what is happening there because now it's too dense, or if we go with some of our imagination and produce something new thing, and then where the curatorial position is coming. That's what you can reflect to that.
Well, I think for a while we were doing a lot of small, very sporadic, spontaneous projects. Artists would come, they were there for a residency for 6 weeks. Because we had a network of artists and we knew several people there, we could broker many relationships, several projects came about. And I think we at Coach began to feel that they were all too sporadic, they were not really building into anything. What were we really doing? Maybe that's when we did feel we were using the community for art. I think one of the things we're thinking about is doing a much more long-term process. For example, Srijata has been working now for a year. So it's better to work with 1 or 2 artists, but she's been working with women in Khirki and developing those long-term relationships. Also, she belongs here. When we have a lot of international artists, and they, as they do, because Khirki just sounds like such a sexy place. There's this great mall here. It seems like, crazy India, what is going on. I mean, there's a certain romanticization when a lot of the international artists come. You have to break that very fast. And so it's a difficult space. Don't assume. And how do you then respectfully and, with a certain amount of ethics, work in that space? And there have been times, I think there have been things that have not been so correct, or so just didn't feel right at that point. So I think we just had to step back and say, okay, what are we doing? And I think anyway, periodically you have to step back when you've had 10 years of doing several projects to see what are the ones that we want to put effort, forget the money, because it's not really so much money, but what is it that Coach should be doing?
I think that this is what I feel. I've been thinking about. I think everything you believe about critical engagement today is at stake, I feel. And if I think it's really the time when artists need to really think, and I don't want to think in terms of projects, but in terms of practice. And I think projects require as an enterprise. And it doesn't mean that public art has to be that enterprise of that spectacle event. That, like Shishira, sorry I say that again, but it's really like that. So there are so many other ways in which you can develop practices which are critical and sharply tuned in. And because when whole narratives are changing, then how do you react to that? It's not one reaction or two. It's not one way of reacting. And I think this is really where the artistic approach is. I think, I could be wrong, but this is what I've been feeling like. So I think this is the time when, art is great fodder for really honing in a sense of purpose for work.
I have a question for Asta and here. I have a question for Asta and Sharmila in particular, but everybody can respond to it. One of the things, all of you have been working for a long time in your fields, respective fields with your respective communities, and the 2 of you are right now directly involved in teaching. You're working with students, and a great number of students are actually now starting to do public art. Like we see 50% of the applications that we get, half of them have done at least 2 projects, which could be called public art. How do you translate your experiences into your teaching? How does it enter your classroom?
first of all, you have, we are doing a MFA, which means that we are mentoring the students that we are getting. And it depends on the kind of student each one is. They are individuals, and what kind of practice or what kind of thinking are they putting into their practice. And as a, let's say, as a teacher, I would sort of prefer to hone their, than,
I'm not suggesting you're teaching them public art. I'm suggesting how do you teach them the responsibilities that comes with this kind of engagement.
Yeah, but I mean that you're doing anyways, and it kind of percolates from the way you speak, what you make, how you sort of ask them to engage with either their own work or with what they read. I mean, one is all the time sort of suggesting a whole lot of things to them, and I guess you can't change the way they work. But there is always this kind of talk which is generated, which does affect their practice, and it happens very organically. I think it's not like something that you have to sit down and. I mean, it is a part of the pedagogy that we hoped, at least the four of us who are on the core team, we believe in a certain kind of practice. So I guess that percolates down to our students.
In Shrishti, at least I try and this is the first forum where we're actually discussing what the idea of public art may be, but I think we're already a couple of years late, and I brought it up with Nupur as well to say that actually Street Art Delhi is now a legitimate, let's not look at artists intervening in public spaces, let's look at public spaces and what's happening. So just in Bangalore, from Ugly Indian to Mara Jaga, there are all these interventions in public places, and so is street art. And this is a force to reckon with, because actually Street Art Delhi has a bigger audience than any of our projects put together have had till now. It's a fact. Now, it's a very problematic zone where they are. It's a Swachh Bharat campaign. It's been funded by Nerolac. It's in a place where it needs to be questioned. But at least with the students, I'm trying to think this through, because it seems like the community art, the contemporary art world is not so, they'd rather not address popular culture, because it confuses things too much. So at least with my students, for me, it makes me feel a little more pertinent when we have these discussions, because we are developing this idea of our history or context while we live through it. And I find it very difficult to actually take references from any theoretician from any other country, because it's happening now, and I can see how government changes and policy changes are affecting people who are interested in not just materiality and public walls, but also what it means and who are the people who see this. So.
Any other questions?
Taking your question forward, and I think it's also useful to think if you can do that more consciously, what she's suggesting in a.
But it happens.
No, I know that I admit. I'm saying, is it? Say you're not, somebody else is doing it. Is the way to do this more as a conscious, as part of the curriculum or something? That's what she was asking.
Just for instance, you were saying something about the number of permissions that an artist needs to get to install in a public space. It's not something an artist has access to unless they actually do a project of this sort. Is there some way of bringing in the right people to speak about how you get permission? It's just an idea. It's just something to throw out there.
One is doing that. I mean, most of our students are sitting right here for this seminar that says that, they are interested in a certain kind of knowledge about a certain kind of practice. And they may not necessarily go for, some other talk or some other seminar. And I guess we do have a lot of, we've got Amitesh who comes and talks to them, and a whole lot of people come and talk to them, and they also ask questions. They were part of the Sehmat 1st January thing, where they also, they see other artists and they ask questions, and one is sort of guiding them towards certain things without being didactic. I mean, we know our practice, and it's awful when you are in a position of power and you actually, thrust down a certain practice, which is also a part of, I guess, understanding of the public in a very narrow sense of the student. I mean, you have to look at the student as an individual and not thrust a kind of practice, you know, because I think that is very important. Having come from JJ, it was really sort of very difficult to be any kind of an artist which was not abstract. And so, I mean, I guess I don't want to have just, students who make public art. And I'm very conscious of that as a responsibility.
I think also for several organizations like Koj and others and all over, to create places where you can facilitate a practice like this is important. And that's your way of contributing in terms of just questioning, getting people to think about it. When they're actually putting their project out, they help them. I mean, we tell them, you go get the permission. We'll give you this letter. Go figure it out. And it's tough, So even if they're to work in the mall across, which is a kind of public space, what are the kinds of permissions they need to take there? Not just because we know the owner or because we have a relationship, but what are you going to do and how are you going to actually make sense of that space at all? Or the Mandi market next door.
I think what you also need to tell the students is about responsibility, Working in a public place means a lot of responsibility, means a certain kind of ethics which have to be, which the artist who's practicing has to be aware of. Those are the things that can be, almost taught or told to the students. But whether or not public art per se has to be taught, I don't know. It depends on individuals, yeah.
Especially, I think, in the West Coast, in the States, it's a huge masters in public art.
I just wanted to say we spend a lot of time getting permissions in Pondicherry, and I just watched it happening with the Photo Biennale in Chennai, the time spent getting these permissions. And it seems to me from what I saw, even going to New York and trying to bring a show there, that in New York, they have agencies that specialize in this, and they're the ones that are producing all the public art festivals, okay? And so you go to them and talk to them, and they're the ones with the connections. Is that happening in India anywhere? Because as far as I see, each individual festival or organization is handling their own permissions and having to make their own networks, their own connections, and has that intense struggle to get any space, rather than finding, that's sort of leaving it up to the artist to manage, but administrative groups are not coming together that figure that out and hold on to it and offer it to the next level. No.
Again, Shri Ravi Shankar managed something spectacular.
I think we can share our experiences and give advice, but I think nobody's going to take that on because everybody's not doing festivals of that nature. B, every project needs a different kind of permission depending where you are. So you're not going to have that, and I think that's another big institutional something that needs to be created. I don't know who's going to do that.
But also, can we think of public art not just as big events?
Yeah,
That's what
it can be.
That's like a way of thinking about art in a certain way.
Can you use the mic? We are recording.
I didn't say something so important, but I already said that we think of public art not just as large events. Because there's a whole kind of ecosystem of money and institutions and, Sri Ravi Shankar kind of connections which go into... No, of course, we have to know, we cannot forget what happened.
Very touchy about it.
Yeah, well, he's not technically, but so... No, so that's a separate story. He's a private institution, so he's not a government. So that part of being... So I'm just saying, that is that the only way to think of public art? What about...
One of the ways of getting some of these spaces and kind of highlighting the lack of it, when you do it big, the small ones keep happening and we're all doing it. Many artists across India, across abroad are doing that. They're working in smaller, very particular ways with their communities, their particular people. But sometimes to have something as big as that and to say, no, these are our spaces, that we need them.
But they don't become our spaces.
But if you do them on a regular spaces, at least the access to it opens up.
But the spaces we worked on are not our spaces still. They are they revert back to the spaces which were already there.
That is the fight.
But there is no real fight, I'm saying. It's a notional fight. We're not really fighting about it. And the fight is not only through art. The fights are through other institutional fights. There are other kinds of mechanisms of fighting that. If you want to claim spaces, or it's not only claiming through a festival like that. You have to have a whole engagement with these institutions which claim this to then recover them, and that is really another kind of engagement. So we have to then collaborate with people who are doing those kinds of engagements, and only then you will recover that. But just to pitch for a festival, it's like, Festival of India, and that's the end of it. So become like a spectacle. I'm just worried about this whole relationship with gentrification and how the cities, the aesthetics of that. But it is used. In fact, all the clearances we get are from the government's perspective. They have that in mind. Now, we may not have that in mind, but they're thinking of a city as an international city. No, they're thinking like as an international city, a city which has international marked on the map. Like Shri Ravi Shankar said, I'm sorry to say that, but this happened, is also how it's marked on the map, the global event. So it's working to a certain kind of trajectory of a city's imagination. And actually it's not talking of the city at all, talking of something. So I'm just saying that we have to be conscious of this. And it happens a lot abroad, where art and gentrification, and it goes a lot together.
As a process of
but here, what I'm saying, Pooja, here also people who give us clearances have this in the back of the mind, because they say, the DDA chap told me, when the vice chairman told me, he said, it's okay, we should give you clearances, but because we want more people to come to this park. And our thing was nothing to do with the park, but they want more people to come to the park. And then we discovered this whole plan of they want to redevelop that whole area. That came subsequently. So there was this thought which legitimized their giving clearance to us. It worked within what they wanted us to do. So there is always this political imagination which the state has towards that. And we have to be aware of it. And how do you counter it is you have to work out a strategy. It's not just an easy thing.
Even the metro allowing ITO to be painted is over the
That's
JNU
right.
protests. No? That's why they allowed some artists to come in.
Like Amar's work, they said shift the work, no? He was so worried it's so political. In Jantar Mantar,
Nobody asked to shift.
then he shifted it himself.
He never shifted. It was there.
Something happened under tree, and they said put it under tree, I
It was
remember.
always under the tree. It remained under
No?
the tree.
Okay. White art.
He was scared.
He was scared. Okay, so and he told me that. And he said, doesn't matter.
Okay, thank you so much for coming, and thank you all.